People have made fun of me. They've laughed at me. They're like, how'd you go to business school and you're talking about Bitcoin? That makes no sense whatsoever.
We truly are all Bitcoiners before we were Bitcoiners, because you have to have that mindset and that risk taking to do something like this, just because it goes against everything that we've been taught. We've done the traditional way of learning, and it's like none of this was taught in traditional way of learning. What was like that thing for you that was like a little tricky for you to understand when you first found out about Bitcoin?
The concept of you don't actually own Bitcoin, you just have custody of it. And when I realized that my custody or my access is linked to private keys, 12 words, I was like, what? So without talking about money, without talking about technology, critical thinking to me is quite important so she can understand for herself what is important, why it's important. Here's someone who is propagating some kind of narrative. Here's another narrative. What do you think of this?
When I spoke to Tally just about what did she think were like important things of when you're teaching your child about Bitcoin, and that's literally what she said: critical thinking.
Wow. So the other day I looked at her and I said, what is Bitcoin? And she said, Mommy, Bitcoin is money. And I was like, oh, so you do listen. You are paying attention, And she said, but I can't see it though. There's something I actually learned here when I moved to Switzerland, which is learning how to be bored. I'd never heard of it before. And it was a former colleague. She was saying that she had to learn how to be bored. And I was like, what does that mean? And she said, no stimulation. Like you have to be comfortable going through periods of time where you're not stimulated, where you're not even like reading something. You are just like learning how to be bored. And I thought, wow.
Has she ever like been out with you and she's seen Bitcoin, or they said Bitcoin accepted here?
Yeah, every time she sees a Bitcoin sign, she'll be like, Mommy, Bitcoin.
I used to watch and have all of my friends' kids, and like things that I would do with my friends' kids. Now when I'm doing those same things with my daughter, I am sweating bullets. I'm so nervous, and it's just like I was never that way with my friends' kids. I was never that way with my nephews. I remember my dad is a boater, so we were on a dock and I'm holding her. And I lie to you not today, I'm literally holding her, and in my mind, I'm thinking about if this is what am I going to do?
Right? I'm going to tell you the crow story. My husband makes fun of me to this day. So we were outside and there was a crow that to me was a little too
Let me tell you exactly what you'll get if you subscribe to Raising Satoshi. Each video you'll hear from real parents, real educators, not influencers, not experts, just everyday people trying to figure out how to explain Bitcoin to their kids. And the best part of all, we keep it simple. No complicated charts, no confusing language, just real conversations that you can actually understand and use. You'll even walk away with things that you can try at home. How to explain Bitcoin to your kids, how to talk about savings. You'll also hear the real moments, the funny questions, the confusion, sometimes my daughter interrupting the interview, and of course, the wins. So if you ever thought, am I too late? How do I start? What if I'm still learning myself? Then this is for you. Subscribe to Raising Satoshi, and each video will give you simple, real ways to start building a better financial future for your family. One conversation at a time, one lesson at a time, one sat at a time.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Raising Satoshi, and I'm so honored to have Saidah with us here today. Welcome, Saidah.
Thank you, Tima. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, do you mind telling the audience just a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Saidah Gomez. I host a podcast called Ask a Bitcoiner 21 Questions, where I challenge Bitcoiners like Tima to answer 21 questions about Bitcoin and Bitcoin adjacent topics within 10 minutes. And then I also have full-length interviews where we do a deep dive on a specific topic. And there's a prize for the viewers. You can win 21,000 sats if you find the 12-word seed phrase during the interview.
Now, so in your time doing this podcast, how many people have actually made it in the 10 minutes? Like, do you keep a record?
I did, and then I stopped, but I want to say maybe like 10, 10 or under, I would say.
Yeah. You know why? Because like sometimes when I listen to the interviews, you forget that you're in this 10-minute time frame, and it's like you answer the question as if like it's a regular question, so you give detail rather than just saying yes, no.
Yeah.
Like answering in direct, even though you know that's what you're set up to do and you fully explain what the purpose of the interview is, everyone still goes like over detailed on answering your questions.
Yeah, because it's and that's part of the challenge, And I'm sure we'll get into this later about parenting and some of the things that you want to instill in your child, but knowing when to stop
Yes.
sometimes is just as valuable as knowing when to speak excessively.
Yes. Yes. Great point. So like for me, I always wonder like how people first got into Bitcoin. So what was like, quick summary of your Bitcoin journey? Like what drew it to you?
So in 2016, I
Mhm.
consciously heard about Bitcoin for the first time. So I did a business school where we had, what do they call them? Discovery expeditions. So we went to Silicon Valley in California, we went to Beijing and Shanghai, and we went to Mumbai in India. And when we were in Silicon Valley, we were representing a small Swiss company that specializes in 5D art. That's what they did back then, like 10 years ago. And they were looking to build basically their business model. And so the topic of blockchain and art came up. And I'd never really heard or paid attention to blockchain before. And there was one guy from the Czech Republic in our group who had a very strong reaction. And he said, "That's not what blockchain is for. It's not for art." And I was like, dude, like, what's wrong with this man? But
Right.
his passion and his just like visceral response really grabbed my attention. But I was occupied with a lot of other things, so I didn't really pay attention to it. And then fast forward less than a year later, so 2017, my father told me to watch The Kaiser Report with Max and Stacy. I've told this story so many times, and the rest is history, I'll say, because, I listened to it so frequently. And what I really appreciated about that show and the format is that they really discussed Bitcoin against a geopolitical and economic backdrop. And that resonated with me. So I continued to tune in. And then from there, I learned about Andreas Antonopoulos. I bought a Mastering Bitcoin, a Saifedean, the Bitcoin Standard, and they had like everyone on their podcast. So it was a great way for me to be exposed to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think it's neat though because like, being there we're talking about how we're gonna instill Bitcoin into our children. It's kind of like your dad really was an integral figure for you, which I love this story. And if you guys get a chance, check out her podcast because the interview with her dad is phenomenal. And it's just like it's neat because a lot of times you don't find I hate it's not so much you don't find a lot of boomers that are into Bitcoin, but when you do, they're really convicted. They're really passionate. And that's what I thought about your dad. And I just think it's interesting that he kind of like, even though he wasn't the person to introduce you to it, he was like the person that kind of like sealed that deal for you. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it fits the theme of raising Satoshi perfectly
Yeah.
because, firstly, father daughter bond to be able to discuss, current events. We're not talking about family members. We're not talking about the latest drama. Like, we're
Right.
bonding on another level, which is refreshing for both of us. And the other thing is, I remember having Pablo from Panties for Bitcoin on my other podcast a while ago. And he said something that really stuck with me, which is, you don't become a Bitcoiner. Maybe you're always a Bitcoiner. And I was like, oh, that's deep. What does that mean? And
Yeah.
so, in discussions with my father, I realized that so my father always advocated for saving, especially being from Trinidad and Tobago. He spoke about gold. Gold is real money. This is not real money. When they got a mortgage a long time ago, they said to me, my dad was like, I was shocked because we just went into the bank's office and they just did boom, boom, boom. And all of a sudden the money was created. That's not real money, Sai. So it's like, it's sharing these stories that are very much part of life. So they stick to me. and
Right.
being open and talking about like what value is, what money is, what's the difference between gold and fiat. Like, I think that that laid a really strong sort of foundation for me to build on.
Yeah. And I think also too, kind of like what I realized is when I was working overseas, I found that people from the West are, it's like mostly, I would say, non-Americans, right? Like that was my first introduction to gold. Not to say that I didn't know what gold was, but like I vividly remember my friends, like some of my friends from India, some of my friends from the Philippines, my friends from Africa, everybody like emphasized like this Tima, when you get engaged, they were like, make sure you get a gold band. And I was just like, you know,
Oh,
why? They were like, because if anything ever happens and you and your husband come upon hard times, you can sell that and you can get more money, you know, like for it versus like something else. And I was just like, well, I didn't even think about it that way. But it was just like, I find that, you know, depending on what part of the world you're from, you know, the value of certain things are different from what we understand value being here. And so like what I found is that a lot of people, in my opinion, have a stronger reaction to Bitcoin when they've been from situations where their money has been devalued and they're used to it being not the same value, even though the dollar isn't either. But it's just like you're talking about extreme devaluation where it's like it something that we haven't experienced yet. You know what I mean? So I just think it's a cool relationship that you have with your dad, and he was an integral part of your Bitcoin journey.
yeah, totally. I'm so grateful. And
Yeah.
that emotional connection has definitely motivated me, especially during times when people have made fun of me, they've laughed at me, they're like, "How'd you go to business school and you're talking about Bitcoin? That makes no sense whatsoever." You know what I mean? Like, you're supposed to be like, I don't know. And so it's really held me down and given me just, a sense of grounding and confidence.
Yeah. And you know, I think like with your introduction, like you said, like it was a discovery program and blockchain was part of that. Blockchain honestly was probably the hardest concept for me to understand when I first jumped onto Bitcoin. And I like what Pablo said because I feel like we truly are all Bitcoiners before we were Bitcoiners, because you have to have that mindset and that risk taking to like do something like this just because it goes against everything that we've been taught. And similar to you, you know, like college educated, you know, like we've done the traditional way of learning, and it's like none of this was taught in traditional way of learning, right? Like, and so when I was, you know, hearing about Bitcoin, and you know, I tell everybody honestly, when I first jumped on, it was because of price, right?
Yeah.
But
I
you
mean,
know,
yep.
and it's like now it's so far removed. I don't check price. I don't care about price. I'm more so trying to understand how it can help me and my family, and what, you know, the nuances of Bitcoin and what it affects and things like that, more so than the price. And it's
Mhm.
just like, for me, the blockchain part was so hard. And I remember reading the white paper like over and over because, as you know, like our brother was like, read the white paper, read the white paper. And it was just like certain parts of the white paper, I'm like, what double
Yeah.
spending? Okay, like, you know, and it's just like, what was like that thing for you that was like kind of like a little tricky for you to understand when you first like found out about Bitcoin?
Um, you know what really floored me was the concept of you don't actually own Bitcoin, you just have custody of it.
Mhm.
And basically, what you can do is sign with your keys. And when I realized that my custody or my access is linked to, private keys, 12 words, I was like, what? Like, what is this? What is this?
Yeah,
How do I, what is this? And I remember for like a good few months, I was just like, is that what it is? You know what I'm saying? Like, so whatever I'm seeing on my wallet is the visual, my what? That was
yeah,
something that really just, there are times randomly where I'm just saying like, am I crazy? No, but it's still this. And you
yeah, yeah.
transact and you kind of take it for granted. And
Right.
then, I just have moments of pause where I'm just like, wow, this is actually what it is.
Yeah, the 12 words. And you know, sometimes it's kind of like when I explain Bitcoin to certain people who, you know, aren't that familiar with it. And it's I try to like break it down as simple as possible because, as you know, we like to keep things simple and easy for people to understand. And I'm just like, okay, just thinking of it like if you had multiple pins when you're taking out money, like, how the ATM usually is like, I think it's only like 4 digits, right? Just imagine if you had that, three times, right? You had to enter in that code three times, right? They're like, oh, and it's just like certain things click for different people. But I think that like once I understood how blockchain worked, and that I think also too it was the physical aspect of it, that it's not like something you can
Yeah.
physically touch. It's something
Yep.
that you can physically see. It was like, all right, I understand that this is on a public ledger and this is something that I can see, I just can't physically touch. But it's just like, why would you really want to physically touch something that's so manipulated? Right. So then it just
Mhm.
kind of like led me down more rabbit holes about what is money. Right.
Yeah.
Just like I think that now, like with my journey, I tell people to focus more on like what is money versus being so caught up on the technical side of Bitcoin. Because once you
Yeah.
understand what money is and you understand the manipulation with the money system, then I think it's easier to understand why people are so, pro Bitcoin.
Yep. And the drive or the motivation is there to really learn and
Yeah.
master the technology for your use case, you know. If you're not if you're not a developer, if you're not building something, you don't necessarily need to know certain technical skills, but for your own self-sovereignty, you'll know what you need to know.
Yeah. So, in terms of your Bitcoin journey, I know for me, um, it was really important for me, like in terms of my parenting and just becoming a mother journey, right? I knew that I wanted to emphasize just reading initially, like when I first had my daughter. And I just found that, like many peers, cousins, relatives that I was around, those children that had a real true focus on reading, it seemed to me, in my opinion, that they were just, oh, they spoke better, they knew they had a stronger vocabulary, they were, able to kind of sit by themselves and just, have a wild imagination. So I wonder sometimes, like with parents who have older children, like what their strategy is. But I know for me, it was just like reading. So as you can see, I have, if you give them Monster Bitcoin, right? So Sean Marie was a huge help, right, with their books. And, as she gets older, I'll transition to the Total Twins and things like that. But
Yeah.
how, for you, like, what did you say to yourself, like when you found out that you were becoming a mother? Like, all right, how am I going to do this with her in the sense of introducing Bitcoin?
Well, that's a good question. And I have to say that I can say this. So I gave birth just a few months before COVID really broke out. And
Hmm.
so that kind of, threw me.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. And so so while I was pregnant, it was no internet whatsoever until she's a certain age and reading to her. Like we have that in common most definitely because yeah, even pregnant, I have pictures when she was really small and I'm reading her a book. So
Mhm.
my husband and I take turns with her bedtime. She gets a bedtime story every night, one night in French, one night in English.
Oh, nice.
And that is like for me just a really important building block. She's getting a bit older now, so we can read the stories and then we can talk about the stories and kind of not analyze them, but just encourage her to start to think critically about information that she's consuming. Because I think that is so without talking about money, without talking
Mhm.
about technology, critical thinking to me is quite important so she can understand for herself what is important, why it's important, what, here's someone who is, propagating some kind of narrative. Here's another narrative. What do you think of this? So we have those types of conversations. And I hope that like as she grows, we can have deeper conversations about things that are happening.
That's amazing that you said that just because I'm not sure if you're familiar with Free Market Kids, Tally, and I forgot her husband's
No.
name. But okay, so Tally and her husband, they have these Bitcoin games, more so geared for like the 6+ age group of children, I would think. But they have 4 children. They homeschooled all their children. And
Wow.
when I spoke to Tally just about like what did she think was like important things of when you're teaching your child about Bitcoin, and that's literally what she said: critical thinking. She
Wow.
said
Yeah.
about teaching them Bitcoin. She said because what's going to happen is as they get older, especially because everybody kind of goes still the same traditional way, like you're still talking about a very small percentage of the world who are Bitcoiners. She said they're going to be such outcasts that they have to be firm in their foundation, and they have to understand critical thinking in order to assess, like, all right, yeah, hey, because we still use fiat, right? It's not like we're, unless you're on the Bitcoin standard, but it's not like, everybody's on the Bitcoin standard. So it's just, she was saying in interactions with other kids, you want them
Yep.
to be able to like stand firm in their conviction and stand firm in their understanding of not so much understanding of Bitcoin, but understanding of like what something is true to them. And I was just like,
Yeah.
wow, I never even thought about that. So to hear you say it, and you've never heard me mention her before, it's kind of
Yeah.
like, that's a phenomenal point. And it's just like, I think sometimes I get so, I don't know, like caught up in like, all right, I want her to understand this and we got to play this game. And it's just like, no, 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 no. She needs to understand that like, this is what we're doing. Right. And we're staying true to yourself, and you don't have to be mean or nasty to other kids about whether what they're being taught, but this is what you're being taught, you know?
Yep. Absolutely. And the consistency of it as well. So that's the other thing too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I get critiqued because we don't have so many routines, but we have the same routines.
Right, right,
Breakfast in the morning. On the weekends, we have lunch together, we have dinner together, we have the bedtime routine with the books and stuff.
right,
And, when we're not within those sort of like time slots, we do whatever we do.
right,
But there are always opportunities to have conversations. What'd you do at school today? What happened? And it's building blocks again. So, I mean, I'm not like a drill sergeant. I don't ask her like, 21 questions all the time, but I do ask certain questions just to see what she's thinking,
okay,
or like, how can you look at this another way? Or if there are conflicts and stuff. So it feeds into critical thinking. And I think it complements, like the bedtime stories and stuff, so that that muscle is just being exercised in her brain.
right. Has she ever asked you any questions specifically about like what, like she knows you have a podcast, she knows that you talk to people, and now obviously she knows you're talking to people about Bitcoin, but like has she ever asked you anything about what it is that you're doing or what is it that you're talking about?
Well, she knows Bitcoin quite well. And like, so for a while, one of the songs we used was Men Like Quakes, Bitcoin Data. She
Yeah, yeah,
got her
yeah.
own piece.
I
She
know.
sings that
She,
all the time. She loves that song. Or she'll say, ask a Bitcoiner 21 questions. So the other
right, right.
day, I looked at her and I said, what is Bitcoin? And she said, Mommy, Bitcoin is money. And I was like, oh, so you do listen. You are paying attention,
Yes, yes,
And she said, but I
yes.
can't see it though. So I
Wow.
mean, like she's aware, and so a small anecdote. She has a little toy, like it's like a safe with like a little toy code and stuff. It goes boop 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 boop.
Okay.
And so she got it as a present, and I didn't say anything initially. She created her code and she shared her code with mommy and daddy, and then friends came over and she shared the code. And I said, it is important to be able to keep certain things to yourself, or
Right.
maybe you'll tell mommy, or maybe you'll tell daddy, but you don't share everything with everyone. She likes to make bracelets. So she'll put her bracelets in her like fake jewelry box. And I said to her, what do you put in there? And she's like, oh, the bracelets I make. And I said, are they special to you? Yes. So do you want just anyone having the code to get those, or is that private?
Hmm.
So I'm sort of breaching the topic of the difference between privacy and secrecy. and why
Yeah.
it's important to learn how to keep things private. Because she
Well,
likes to talk a lot. I talk a lot. My husband talks a lot. And so
right,
for her, it's very natural to communicate, but she doesn't know what we don't say. So it's
right.
about, just helping her to understand privacy, secrecy, what you
Mm,
can share with people.
I have to remember that because, such a big part of the Bitcoin journey is the private part of it, right? And, you hear so many horror stories about people who have shared, and I say the word shared in the sense of they've shared their personal details with someone who they shouldn't have. They clicked a link on an email that someone was sharing with them that, then was malware and took over their system, and that's an amazing point. Like just focusing on, it's like really focusing on the fundamentals of being
Yeah.
what being a Bitcoiner is, right? So it's like the
Yeah.
critical thinking, the privacy, the secrecy of it, and it's like, I know for you and I, it's a little harder in terms of the secrecy because like our faces are on the internet, right? People
Yeah.
know that we talk about Bitcoin, but I don't share how much Bitcoin, Satoshis. I don't share any of that. And I'm not
I
really a
give my Bitcoin away. So, I mean,
yeah, I don't even know where I put mine. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like I have to truly remember that because you don't want your child to withhold stuff in the sense of something that has harmed them or,
yeah.
obviously or hurt or their feelings. But it's
Yeah.
just like that is such a great way to explain like keeping things private because everyone shouldn't have access to everything. Wow.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
little bracelets that she makes, she made them. It's her proof of work that went into them. So they're
Right.
meaningful to her. So it's
Right.
not scary. Like, I'm not trying to scare her about, sharing information. It's
Mhm.
something very personalized for her.
Wow. She, like in terms of books, now there's so many amazing products out there. Tuttle Twins, Free Market Kids, Shamari, I don't know if they're really for her age group, but they do have a lovely game. Have you tried any of their products yet just to test to see how she reacts to it?
I bought her a Shamory book a few years ago. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago that we used to read, but they're not her age anymore. So
Right.
this is again like, um, don't laugh, but
Okay.
we like to play games in the family as well. And there's a game called Skyjo that's available here in Switzerland. And basically, the point of the game is to have the lowest score possible, the least amount of
Oh,
points. So
okay.
you have like some cards are worth -2, some cards are worth 12 or 13, I think is the highest card. And so we play that a lot on the weekends or if we're taking the train or whatever. And so she's learning to count in that
Okay.
way. And
Okay.
so every time there's like that's because I don't have her on she doesn't have a like video games. She doesn't have like my husband has a Switch, but she's not allowed to play it. She's not on the iPad, she's not playing any games on the phone or whatever. So I try to do like,
Hands
proper
on.
counting games. Pardon?
Yeah. No, like hands on stuff.
Yeah, yeah, totally hands-on. And so that's like as close as possible to, I guess, math right now at her age that we have. And so she does the mental math. She gets like rewarded for being able to count to like -25. She's always winning. Her score's like -60 and stuff. So we just try to do, I guess, gamify basics kind of thing
Yeah, yeah,
from that
yeah.
perspective, as opposed to like, hardcore like online games.
Yeah, and I think also too, like I like your approach because for me, I think that I don't know, some parents you have to do what you have to do, so this isn't like a judgment or, I'm
Yeah,
shaming.
yeah, yeah.
It's just like I just see from my perspective that the influence of the phone, the influence of the iPad is just it's just something that I really said to myself that I want to avoid at all costs as long as possible. And not to say like I don't she knows what a phone is. She knows that this is a
Yeah, yep.
laptop. I don't have an iPad, so but she knows that other people have and like when we go visit friends and family, like they have it. So it's not like she's not aware of what it is, but it's just like I personally don't want her walking around holding a phone. I don't want her, and elements or places. I saw somebody on X, a Bitcoiner, by the way. He said that sometimes, like when he has like four children, when it's time for one of them to get a haircut, he brings all four and he makes whoever's not getting a haircut just sit there. He said, because sometimes you need to be alone in your thoughts, right? And then, granted, they're a little bit older, and I
Yeah.
don't really expect for a toddler to be able to sit completely still for 15 minutes. But I think that sometimes we get so accustomed to trying to like fix, like, oh, they're getting antsy or they're getting riled up, that it's like you want to give them something. And it's just like, I just don't see the positive effects of giving a phone to a child so soon. I mean, like, you just look at the studies, right? Like, and there's been a lot of changes. Like, I don't know how it is on your side, but like here in the States, and particularly in like where we live, they've now banned cell phones from high school, right? Now, granted, these kids still do stuff. They bring a burner phone. Like, it
Yeah,
is
of
what
course.
it is. At the same time, that said something that it's too much in school and it's distracting, and teachers are complaining. And I remember when like we were in high school. I mean, I had a cell phone, but I could only use it after 7 o'clock because that's
Yeah.
when you had those minutes and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not like anything happened where my parents couldn't get into contact with me if they needed to while I was at
Right.
school. Now, granted, you could
Like,
say, oh, you have the influence of school shootings and all this other stuff. But honestly, if it's a shooting going on, what is a phone going to do? Just,
yeah, I
it,
completely agree.
you know,
Yeah,
like,
I totally agree. They've banned cell phones. I think it was introduced like 2 or 3 years ago. So
mhm.
elementary school, no cell phones, but I think it's throughout the entire school system that they've banned phones. And there's something I actually learned here when I moved to Switzerland, which is learning how to be bored. I'd never heard of it before. And it was a former colleague who her daughter's in her 20s now, I think. But she was saying that her daughter had to learn, or because she was raised here, she had to learn how to be bored. And I was like, what does that mean? And she said, no stimulation. Like you have to be comfortable going through periods of time where you're not stimulated, where you're not even like reading something. You are just like learning how to be bored. And I thought, wow, that sounds pretty deep.
Yeah. Like he said, just being there in your own thoughts. You know what I mean? And I think like I bring it back to Bitcoin and kids because like that's the other thing that like sometimes when people get into Bitcoin and they jump on, it's like they want the quick, fast, they want it to the price to go up. They want to see their balance to go up so fast. And it's like sometimes we've been so used to that quick gratification
Yeah,
that it affects everything in your lifestyle, right? And it's just like no wonder and more so from the West, like you don't find that, like, I'm not saying that there aren't super, a lot of the issues that occur in America aren't similar issues that occur in Switzerland, but like I've been to Bern, I've been to um, Zurich, and it's just like, to me, I didn't see what I see here, right? So like what I'm saying
yeah,
is like the quick fix when it comes to your health, right? Like everybody's getting gastric bypass here. Everybody's trying to take a pill. Everybody's trying to do something quick in order to get those fast results. And it's just like that it never works out well, right? Like you have to
I
have that
totally
structure,
agree.
you know?
Yep, I totally agree. I think it's changing a little bit here, but Switzerland in general is very slow. Like when I moved here, I would say it's low time preference.
Hold on.
The no cell phones, the learning how to be bored. This culture seems to be anchored in sort of a low time preference lifestyle. So when I
Mhm.
first moved here, I used to go grocery shopping at like 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday because I could. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like I would never meal plan. I would do a grocery list,
Hmm.
but right before I went shopping, I wouldn't think like about the week or whatever.
Right.
And I moved here and things are closed on Sunday. There's a vote coming up that may change. No, I think we voted on that already. But,
Okay.
things were closed on Sundays. The grocery store closes at 7 p.m. Thursday, it stays open until like 8 or 9 p.m. but after that it's closed. So it kind of forced me to, just be organized and think ahead. And
Right.
there are a lot of things like that now that I probably don't even recognize anymore, but it just encourages you to slow down
Yeah.
and, yeah, have a lower time preference. And going back to the cell phones and critical thinking, my fear, especially since, my daughter's still young, her brain is still developing. If she is on screens all the time, how will she develop the ability to think critically when information is just being like streamed at her
Yep.
24/7
Yep.
and there's no pause, there's no discussion, it's just one directional?
Yes. Yes. My daughter's in swim, and in the swim class, the instructor was asking her, "Well, who's your favorite character?" And she was like, "Oh, do you watch this? Do you watch this?" And she's naming shows, and I won't name the shows because I know these are very popular shows. She's like, "No, we don't watch that. We don't watch that." And I'm like, I have to work on her, how she, when people ask her questions like that, because the way
Yeah.
she's answering like, "We don't watch that. We don't watch those shows." And she's like, "Oh, well, what do you watch?" And then she says, like Magic School Bus. And then she asked her like, what was her favorite character? And it's just like, you think about like what you're saying. It's like something's constantly being pushed at you, constantly feeding you, constantly telling you this. And then you wonder why, like, you have all these different kids with certain issues or feelings or opinions about certain things. And it's just like, are they really feelings or opinions, or more so something that they were told how to feel about, right? Like, do they really truly feel this way, or is this something that they've learned by watching something else,
Yeah, like you said earlier, there's absolutely no judgment because it's hard. I mean, like my parents live far away, my husband's parents live far away. When my
Oh,
husband travels on my own, it's really hard to say I'm going to stop what I'm doing and we're going to play together or we're going to go for a walk or whatever. It's hard. I can
yeah,
last about 2 weeks. I
yes,
cannot imagine a single parent, like solo father, solo mother. I can't even imagine what that must be like. And I understand completely. You need to go to the bathroom. Like I get it a hundred
yeah,
percent. But I
yeah,
would say that if you can possibly, avoid giving, especially young children, the phone, it's all the better because I guess the way the brain is being shaped and stuff with the phone is something that can be really difficult to reverse.
very difficult. I think that there have been some studies that shown how like kids who've been like excessively on the phone and iPads and stuff, how when they've done scans of their brains, it's equivalent to, and for adults as well, it has the same, um I don't know what you call it, but like basically somebody who's on drugs, and like that addictive aspect of the brain or wherever that
Yeah, the
shows,
dopamine.
the dopamine, like it shows the
Yeah.
same thing for children. So that's why I'm just like, okay, that's enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
And
don't
the
have to.
paradox with that too is that I'm online a lot. My
Yeah.
daughter sees me with my laptop, and
Mhm.
I've learned so much about Bitcoin online. So that's something that I know that I'm going to have to explain to her in some way how to use things responsibly, or if mommy gets caught up in something, mommy has to like consciously say, I need to stop. So for me, that is something that I would like to learn more about.
Yeah.
For parents who are online, they work online, they like same with my husband, how they manage to, I guess, tell their children that maybe you shouldn't do what I'm doing right now at your age. Later on,
Yeah.
you'll have to find the balance.
Yeah. And that's, I think, it's just like you said, it's always, it's finding that balance, and then also showing them that, there are ways to use certain tools in order to get, good results. So I guess like with that point, when you're, like with this Bitcoin journey, I know for me, it's changed, before I even had a child, like my perspective on a lot of things changed, right? So for you, what about your Bitcoin journey has changed the way that you parent outside of, we've talked about the critical thinking, we've talked about, the privacy, like, maybe like in the beginning, like how did that change you and what you wanted to be as a mother?
I don't know. I would I would say that so before becoming a mom, and I would say maybe a year or two before I got married, I was one of those women who was like, I'm never having children,
Mm.
and so I would have to say that, the Bitcoin ethos and sort of family values, and I suppose more conservatism, has definitely influenced me unbeknownst to me. And the funny thing is, the joke is that I absolutely love my family. I love family so
Right.
much. And I
Right.
love being together. I love seeing the way my daughter is growing. I love seeing the way my husband is evolving. And, I knew him a certain way. And now sometimes he'll say or do something, and I'm like, whoa, I absolutely love it. And I thought before becoming a mom that it would ruin my body. I acknowledge that one of my sins is vanity, that I would be tired all the time, miserable all the time. I'd be missing out on life. I'd be missing out on travel, which is true. I don't travel as much as I used to. The other thing too is I have, I suppose, a fear that I didn't have before. And I think when I gave birth, one of my aunts told me, "Now you know what true love is." And I was like, "What are
Yes.
you talking about?" Like I knew
Yes.
love, but no. I have this other type of fear of certain things. You know what I mean? Like I'm even more risk averse than I used to be. And I am more, I guess, cautious than I used to be. Maybe it'll change as she gets bigger, but I can see that change in me. And I hear and see some things within Bitcoin, like something I appreciate, which is something that I do believe is seen as right wing, I guess, or conservatism or whatever, is family values. And every time I see something linked to that within the Bitcoin space, I feel reassured.
Yeah. It's so funny that you say that because I was that same woman. Like my husband,
Really?
yeah. My husband even said to me the other day, he's like, when I first met you, you said you didn't want to have kids. I was traveling the world, I was doing my thing. I was like the what they call them, the rich auntie, whatever. Like, I was just living, my best life at that time. But then it's just like when you meet someone, and this is like where it goes back to these traditional values that you're talking about. You meet someone, you're like, oh my God, I would love to do that, right? This is something that I want to do. And I'd never had that feeling before with anyone. And I think that, like, just like you, I have more of a conservative viewpoint on family values and things that are important to me. And it's just like, I think that they were always there, but I think it kind of really enhanced when I had a child, right?
Yeah.
And I think also too, what's different about my journey now is similar to you. I have four brothers. My oldest brother had started having children at a young age. So I was an aunt at a very young age, but I used to watch my nephews, and I used to watch, obviously, like I had a child later in life, but like I used to watch and have all of my friends' kids, and like things that I would do with my friends' kids. Now when I'm doing those same things with my daughter, I am sweating bullets. I'm so
Yep.
nervous, and it's just like I was never that way with my friends' kids. I was never that way with my nephews. I remember my dad is a boater, so we were on a dock and I'm holding her. And I lie to you not today. I'm literally holding her, and in my mind, I'm thinking about, if this dock breaks, what am I going to do?
Right?
I'm strategizing. I'm like, okay, all right, so she can, because like I purposely put her in this ISR class as a baby so that if anything ever happens, she knows how to float. So at the time, she's probably like, ooh, like 8, 9 months, maybe ish. So she knows how to do this. So I'm like, okay, she'll be fine. But how long is it going to take me? How long can I float? How long can I until something brings us to a shore? Like all these thoughts that I would never have, never in life. My mom and I, we went to this Air and Space Museum, and the way the museum is laid out, it's like one floor, second floor, third floor, and each floor has like different aircraft, helicopters. And my mom and I are on the third floor, and I'm literally having a legit probably panic attack. But you couldn't tell. Like, I'm cool as a
Yep.
fan. Like, this is cool.
Hmm.
But
You're like a
inside,
duck. The legs under the water are doing this, but you're calm. Yep.
and my mom was like, "Can we go down?" I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "That was freaking me out." I was like, "Me too." You know what I mean? So it's like these different emotions that she would have never experienced before that come with motherhood. But it's just like, I don't feel that way obviously about Bitcoin, but I do feel that way about like real life experiences.
I, I,
You know?
I'm going to tell you the crow story. My husband makes fun of me to this day. So we were outside, and there was a crow
Mhm.
that to me was a little too inquisitive. And it
Okay.
kept coming around and around and around. And I'm like, do you see that? Do you see the crow? And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? And so I said to him, okay, so if the crow comes back and it swoops down, I'm going to like, like kind of like a judo roll to like, and he's like, you are absolutely crazy. And I'm like, you don't get it, do you? I see threats that I've never seen before in my life. I'd never paid attention to crows. And all of a sudden I'm like, what is this bird doing? Why does it keep circling? Like, what does it want? Like I feel as though there's the protective mama bear and kind of like gangster that comes out of me sometimes, like I'm all smiley and all of a sudden I'm ready to fight, I'm ready to I
Like,
took
what?
judo lessons for like 2 years as well, just to be able to like, in self-defense, I know how to block,
Right, right,
but
right.
it's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of times, people, there's certain things that my friends spoke about with motherhood, but like, I don't remember them speaking about that. Like, this kind of like reaction that you have, like, okay, if this occurred, what are my outlook, And I remember because we went to Thailand. First, we went to go visit a relative in Qatar, and then we went to Thailand because, like from the West, it usually that flight connects in either Istanbul or Doha.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, Fatima, don't think about if this plane does anything. Do not,
No.
like, do not think about it. And honestly, I didn't. I didn't. And I, I don't know. I just was like, just leave it out your mind because I probably would have probably passed out on the plane from like overthinking it. But you know what? I don't know if you've been following like, like the different countries and like what's going on with Bitcoin. But when, like, right before I left, Thailand had announced like no capital gains tax on Bitcoin.
Oh.
And in Chiang Mai, there's a gentleman, I don't know his name right now, but he has a Bitcoin research center. So Chiang Mai has like really, I don't want to say they put Thailand on the map when it comes to Bitcoin, but like he hosted a Bitcoin conference, like he did a Bitcoin marathon in Chiang Mai. But what I found that when I went to Thailand, specifically in Bangkok, you know how like you open up the map to see like which vendors are accepting Bitcoin? I would
Yeah.
open up that map and it would be, I'm talking about like in the area where I was in Bangkok, I literally counted like probably 60 places that
Oh, wow.
accepted Bitcoin, right?
Yep.
But when I went to those places, they didn't, So it's
Uh,
sometimes kind of like you see this news and you think that like, oh, I think like I feel the sometimes same way about El Salvador sometimes, that like you hear one side of the story where people are just like, oh, El Salvador is a Bitcoin country. It truly is, in the sense of like what their president is doing, what's going on with like the economy, and how, he's really changed, safe, like they really put themselves on the map. But it's something where I don't know if it transitions down to like the local people, and not to, and
yeah.
like this, no shade to what's going on in these countries because obviously they're doing great things, but it's like sometimes you really have to touch grass, as they say, to see like how Bitcoin has influenced a particular country. I know here, like we have Bitcoin ATMs. There's a really popular coffee shop that accepts Bitcoin, and there's a lot of food trucks that are now accepting Bitcoin in our
Oh,
area.
sweet.
Yeah. Have you noticed, I guess, like, has your daughter noticed anything like if you go out? Like, I know you've shared before, a relative of yours, they were accepting Bitcoin. Has she ever, like, been out with you and she's seen Bitcoin, or they've said Bitcoin accepted here?
Yeah, every time she sees a Bitcoin sign, she'll be like, "Mommy, Bitcoin." But
Yeah.
because so Switzerland, from that standpoint, is pretty interesting. It's decentralized, like the U.S. Like we
Right.
were saying, I think before we hit record, there are different languages in different regions and stuff. So you have, I'm in Geneva, which is less outwardly Bitcoin accepting. So you've got Bitcoin ATMs. Some like convenience stores have Bitcoin in the window, so you know you can buy it. There is a shopping mall here called Manor. They have a Bitcoin ATM that's been there for years, like years. You have certain places that will accept Bitcoin, but it's not as much as Lugano, for example, where they hold the Plan B conference. That
Yeah.
place is just, it's bananas. It's everywhere. There's a luxury real estate company that has an office in Lugano and in Geneva. In the
Oh.
Lugano location, they say, you know, if you want to pay in Bitcoin, please contact us. Here in
Wow.
Geneva, there's like no word of Bitcoin whatsoever. And I
Mm.
think that that has to do with a lot of the sort of legacy wealth managers and wealth banking is still here in Geneva, whereas I think Lugano is sort of open territory. You know, they can experiment a lot more. They can have a strong Bitcoin presence without disrupting the legacy industry and stuff. So when she sees it, she does say something. But going back to parenting, in terms of privacy, I also have to be mindful that she doesn't speak too much about Bitcoin to maybe the wrong kids whose parents
Yes.
are, you know what I mean? So it's it's kind of delicate. She can say Bitcoin, that's fine, but just not, you know, too much detail.
Right. You know, from reading the Shamari books, what's interesting is that she thinks that Satoshi is, the monster,
Hmm.
right? So she's like, "Oh, that's Satoshi," and I'm just like, "That's fine," like, and like you said, like when we're out and about, um, I I don't I don't know if people even recognize, like, because they have like merch and stuff. So sometimes she'll wear like a hoodie, and I'm very cautious about like where we go and when she's wearing it. But people are like, "Oh, I like your monster shirt." They don't even see the Bitcoin. Like it's not even visually recognized to them. And it's also kind of like sometimes even when I wear like a Bitcoin pin, I may wear like, it's wintertime here, so I may wear like a Bitcoin hoodie. And I'm telling you, I've never had anyone come up to me and say like, "Oh, you're into Bitcoin," or "Oh, like," never, 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 and it's
Really?
never, ever. Like no one has ever come up to me and said anything. So, a funny story, I was down visiting, like, so they have like different story times. And so they have one at this museum. And I'm coming out of the museum, and it's one of my more favorite like story times because like it's really interactive. They do art and stuff. And I see this guy walking down the street, and he has on a Bitcoin shirt, but he has on like, when they do those hackathons,
Yeah.
so he did it like he had on a, it was a specific shirt, like it was a hackathon shirt. It was in Tennessee. And I was like, "Oh, this guy, like, where would they get this from?" So I walk up to him, and I have her in my arms, and I'm just like, "Oh, hey, like, are you, I'm pointing at his shirt because when he started to speak, I think he was definitely Asian, but I don't know if he was like Chinese or if I couldn't tell like what part of Asia he was from. But, I could hear the accent, and I was just like, "Oh, like, where did you get your shirt?" And he was like, "Oh, my country's big." And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm a Bitcoiner. Like, I like your shirt." And he like was like, "No, no, no." And I was like, "Oh my God, I think he
Oh,
thinks I'm
wow.
begging. I think he thinks like like the gypsy women, like, I have my baby and I'm like, oh, I'm just trying to trick
Oh,
him into
oh, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
like, oh God, this was like really wrong. And like he started like walking fast, and he pulled out his camera, and he's like trying to pretend like he's taking pictures. I was like, let me just leave this guy. So I was like, you know what? I'm never asking anybody else again about what they have on, because it was, when I tell you, it was the most awkward experience I've ever had. It was the most
I
awkward
could
experience.
only imagine.
Yeah, so it's tricky because as a parent, you have to be cautious about a lot of things. And, I just don't want it to become where I have to feel like it's a threat. Because, like, I don't know if you pay attention to sometimes of James Lopp's posts. He does a lot of posts
Oh
sometimes
yeah.
on all the, when people are getting kidnapped and all the, all the awful things that sometimes happen with people. But then he also kind of points out some of the things that they did incorrectly, and like
Mhm.
why they are targeted. So it's just like, I just don't ever want to become my family to become a target because of something that I'm interested in or doing.
Yeah. I face that dilemma. There are solutions, right? I mean, full disclaimer, if anyone tries to come to me directly for any Bitcoin they think I could have, they'll be sorely disappointed, you know? And so
Yeah.
that person will have to face their own life trade offs between maybe committing a crime and suffering the consequences for
Right.
nothing or, but
Yeah.
I do think about that a lot. And at the same time, and this is where the balance and the fear comes in. At the same time, I don't want to be policed or I don't want to be censored because of fear.
Yeah.
And I can say that just as Max and Stacy a long time ago spoke about Bitcoin and helped me to understand it and indirectly helped me to improve my life, someone may hear me speak about it. A few people actually over the years have said to me, I wish I had bought Bitcoin when you told me about it, like one on one the first time. A few people have said, you know what, I looked into it, or, they probably, yeah, one person like bought, a home or part of their home with it, And so I know that I've actually helped people or helped people to finally start to learn about it. So it's
Right.
the balance, but I don't want fear and I don't want a few, mentally deranged people to get in the way of a larger number of people learning and benefiting.
Yeah, that's true. So, like, what do you wish for? Like, we all have different, I think we all have, Bitcoiners all have a similar feeling about like what your expectations for Bitcoin is. But I think, particularly for people who have families, like, what do you envision the future for your family with Bitcoin? Or I guess, like, how it could change your family's future?
I would say that I hope, and this is, probably pretentious to say, that more and more people start to learn about Bitcoin and learn about all of the things that come with Bitcoin in order to build a healthier society, which would in turn benefit my child. It's very selfish from that perspective. Lowering your time preference, learning how to save, being aware of privacy, saying, like, I'm not going to try to scam people to make money. I'm going
Right.
to do things the hard way and build the hard way. And you know what? That's okay because all of a sudden, housing prices, rents, everything is deflationary. So I don't need to try to like 20x everything in order to buy my home. The prices are coming down, they're reasonable. I can do an apprenticeship, I can learn, I can save whatever I can save and still be able to buy groceries and stuff. Like that's my approach. Just a
Yeah.
better society so that my child can grow up feeling normal and comfortable.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Just because I tell people, like, when people have like political or any type of discussions with me, I'm like, it all relates back to money. I don't care what side you're on. I don't care where you at. It all relates back to money. No, 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 Fatima. th- This is this. And I'm just like, it goes back to money. So I like that. I like, that you want them to have a better society. And it's not selfish because I think like we all want our next, generation to have a better society where it's not like a fight or flight mode where they're anxious about, oh, should I go to school or where should I live or I can't afford this or
Exactly.
you know what I mean? Just because things are just getting so expensive day by day. So I
Yeah.
love that answer. Yeah.
And you speak about left versus right. I just did a podcast episode with Philip D. McCombs. He's a libertarian out of Ohio.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
was the exact topic of the podcast. Because I mean, I didn't know who Charlie Kirk was. Over the
Right.
holidays, I saw Charlie Kirk, then I saw Erica Kirk, and then I saw Nicki Minaj, who's from
Hmm.
Trinidad. And I'm like, oh, what? Like, oh, what is
Yep.
this kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
went down like a. Go ahead.
It shocked me when I saw her with Erica. I was just like, wow, okay, Nikki.
Right. And so I'm learning who Erica Kirk is, Charlie Kirk is. And in my learning process, everything was left versus right, black versus white. And so the question, in the episode we did together is, if we want society to be better, why don't we talk about money and the monetary system and what that's doing to people and stuff? So, and that should come out next week. So, wow, that's incredible.
I don't want to like put his business out there, but he has like interesting. I don't know if he talked about his game. Did he mention that?
His game?
His game, like he's creating a game. I don't know what's called, but I guess he didn't talk about it, but he has like
No,
go ahead.
I know he was just talking about the Libertarian Party, but I kind of oriented the conversation that way, so maybe he didn't get a chance to bring it
Yeah,
up.
yeah. I've spoken to him before and he's pitched me an idea and I'm just like, wow, that's incredible. And I like people who come up with ideas of how to teach Bitcoin and different ways to help other people understand Bitcoin. So yeah, it was just a neat idea. Maybe he's on pause with it right now. But let's have some fun.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Some rapid fire questions.
Oh,
You
here we go. Hold on, let me sip some water.
get some water. It's just three. Let's see. One, two, three. Yeah,
Three.
just three.
Okay.
Okay. Not 21. You ready? You ready?
Okay.
Oh, is it three? Yeah, it's three. Okay. Bitcoin in 3 words.
Self-sovereignty agency.
Okay. All right. What is the first thing your daughter ever asked you about when it came to like money?
What is money?
I like that. Um, Stats or snacks?
Sats.
Now, if your daughter was answering, she might say snacks.
Food. Food, period. It could be beef. It could, like food.
If your daughter had anything to hodl for 10 years, what would it be?
Her bracelets that she
Yeah.
makes herself. She loves her
Uh,
stuff.
You know, I keep like when my younger cousins make me bracelets, I keep them. So that's so special because I have a few, and it's just like I still wear them to this day because they're elastic. And my daughter has those
Yeah.
bracelets here somewhere. So oh, that's so cute. So Dad, thank you so much for speaking with us today. This has been such an insightful and great interview, and like I'm really truly loving this just because I get to kind of understand different ways to really raise a Satoshi, right? And it's like sometimes you have to think about those influences and outside things that I didn't really think about before, but it's like really setting that foundation of what it means to become a Bitcoiner.
Thank you. And thank you again for doing this series. I look forward to seeing, other parents and learning from them. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So last question. If there's one thing that you would want to leave or share with your daughter, whether she would have watched this podcast now or later in life, what would it be?
Oh, I mean, cheesy. She knows this, but just mommy loves you. I love you from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, that's so sweet. Please let the audience know like where they can find you, all your handles, how they can get in contact with you if they're interested in coming on your show.
Yes, yes, yes. I always like to have new guests on. For the most part, across socials, it's Ask a Bitcoiner 21 questions. And on X, it's Ask a Bitcoiner 21 because the handle is really long. And if it's on Noster, you can just type in Saidah, Saidah, and you should find me.
All right. Yay. Well, thank you so much. This has been
Thank
great.
you.
All right.
Let me tell you exactly what you'll get when you subscribe to Raising Satoshi.
Real parents, real educators, just everyday people figuring things out. Raising Satoshi, building a better future.